like to start all our events with the mission, vision, and code of conduct. So Women Who Code, our mission is inspiring women to excel in technology careers. And our vision is a world where diverse women are better represented as engineers and tech leaders. All of our events, including our online events, adhere to the Women Who Code Code of Conduct. Women Who Code is an inclusive community dedicated to providing an empowering experience for everyone who participates in or supports our community, regardless of gender, gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, ability, physical appearance, body size, race, ethnicity, age, religion, caste, creed, political affiliation, and preferred programming languages. And you can read our full code of conduct and access our incident report form at womenwhocode.com/code of conduct. That's all I got.
All right. Wow. Programming languages, huh? Okay. Thank you guys so much for that introduction. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So my talk is on quality engineering, automate your way to excellence. I'm sure some of you don't even know what quality engineering is, much less automation. So I'll go over that a little bit too. A little bit about me. I graduated from Hackbright Academy, which is a coding boot camp for women in San Francisco, California. I became a contract to hire Python developer after that. I moved to Denver in 2015, and I ended up getting a quality engineering job kind of as a foot in the door. There wasn't a lot of Python in Denver at the time. I needed a job. The company that I got hired with was hiring quality engineers. I didn't really know what that was, but I figured this is great. I'll get my foot in the door, I'll learn the code base, and then I can transition to engineering. Well, I ended up loving it. I've been doing it for 7 years. I have never looked back. So I'm very passionate about my job and sharing it with other people. And I recently accepted a position as a quality engineering lead for Fanatics Incorporated, and that is where I am now. So what is QA automation, and why am I excited to give a presentation on it? Well, the what we're going to get into in this presentation, but the why, it is a very in-demand field. It's a job where you get to code every single day. And when you find a bug, it's not your problem. You get to let the developers fix that. You just get to work on writing your code, trying to break other people's code. And there are so many opportunities, and there's just not enough people doing it. So hopefully I will interest some of you in pursuing a career in quality engineering after this. So let's talk a little bit about QA and the development process. So the devs get started working. The quality engineer is going to test things iteratively. When the ticket that the developer is working on passes manual testing, it's marked as passed. The dev merges it into master. There may or may not be a full or partial manual regression. Oops, sorry. I just got a new keyboard. Regression is retesting existing functionality to make sure the merging of new functionality didn't break anything. So if a bug is found during regression, it goes back to the devs. If there's a bug found in the dev work, it goes back to the devs. This regression of retesting existing functionality, what I mean by that is it's retesting everything. That's logging in and literally clicking every single button in your app, doing every single piece of functionality, just because you can never be 100% sure when you're dealing with login. For example, if something sneaky gets into login, then no one can log in, and that can break everything. So most companies don't do a full or even sometimes partial manual regression because it's extremely time consuming. You may have multiple browsers, mobile web versus regular web, native apps, different devices, different OS versions, and different data sets. You might have logged in users and guest users. So you can imagine how extremely time intensive this could be. I worked for a company that did a full manual regression after every sprint. It took 4 people 6 days to test every single thing in all of the different browsers. If there's no regression, however, more bugs are definitely going to be introduced, just because you never know when you start messing with one area of the app, it could break another area of the app. So let's check this out with automation. So the difference is going to be everything is pretty much the same as the last thing that we looked at, only after the dev branch is merged into master, the quality engineer will automate that test. So that same manual test that the quality engineer did on that ticket will get automated. It'll get merged into a regression suite, and then you can run an entire automated test suite against master. That spits out pretty fast. You find any bugs, create a defect, kick it back to the devs. And when they say everything's fixed, you click your button again and you run the entire regression branch. So, as is probably obvious, there are a lot of benefits to quality engineering automation. You only have to automate a test once. You know, your dev creates a new form, you fill out that form, the form works, you automate a test that fills out that form, you add it to your suite, that's done. You could have multiple data sets per test. You can run the same tests against multiple inputs, multiple types of users. You can do it against multiple browsers, machines, browser sizes, etc. You can run a full suite or smaller subsets. So you can have a smoke test suite, or you can have a test suite that just covers maybe your navigation or your login page or your checkout cart. Tests can be multi-threaded, which means you can have multiple tests running at the same time. A regression suite can be run on an automatic CI job or build triggers. So you can schedule regression to kick off every night and then you review it in the morning, or you can have it kick off every time there's a new build. And this really allows your quality engineers to focus more on manual exploratory testing and things that can't be automated yet or not yet automated. So stuff like, is this the right color? Does this layout look okay? Like those aren't things that are easy for a computer to figure out. But this is something that a human can do if they have the time. So there are tons of different front-end automation frameworks. This is not by any means an exhaustive list. You can see they're kind of broken down by JavaScript. There's some test frameworks that support multiple programming languages. So if you notice, Selenium is on every single one of those. Selenium is kind of the most prolific testing framework, and several of these frameworks in this chart are built on top of Selenium. So that's going to be the one that we discussed today. That is Selenium. And Selenium can be used with any of these programming languages as well as several more. So this is a pretty solid choice if you're just getting started. All right, so what is Selenium WebDriver? It was created in 2004 by a programmer at ThoughtWorks, which is actually here in Denver, Colorado. It became open source that same year. So this is a free and open source framework. In 2011, this is kind of when like the Selenium of today was born, Selenium 2.0. That is when Selenium actually merged with one of its competing frameworks, WebDriver. And now they're like an awesome transformer of Selenium WebDriver. It works on Windows, Macs, and Linux, multiple programming languages. You can test on multiple browsers, and many other test frameworks sit on top of Selenium. Another fun fact, Appium, I noticed we have a mobile programmer in the audience. Appium is basically Selenium for native mobile. You can do iOS and Android, and you can have your Appium and Selenium tests in the same suite. Okay, so how does Selenium actually work? And this is pretty much how most frameworks built on Selenium work. The test commands are converted into an HTTP request by the JSON wire protocol. Before executing any test cases, every browser has its own driver. So you can see there's Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Opera, Edge, which initializes the server. And then the browser starts receiving the request through its driver. So again, multiple browsers, programming languages, it all kind of works the same way. So for what we're going to be talking about today and for the demo I'm going to do, this is the tech stack we're going to be using. We'll be using Selenide. It's basically a Selenium wrapper that just simplifies a lot of Selenium functionality. Selenium's kind of like JavaScript in that it's been around forever and there's a lot of quirks and there's various libraries to try and minimize those quirks. TestNG is another framework that works with Selenium and Selenide. It makes the tests and reports easier to understand, and it allows for easy creation of test groups. We're going to be talking about page object model, which is just kind of like the best practices way to set up a testing framework. We'll go over a working project. We'll talk a little bit about how continuous integration can improve your quality. Third-party services for if you want to run your automation against different browsers and devices, kind of how to get started, how to pick a framework, and I'll give you some additional resources. So kind of the bedrock of any automation framework that you're going to have is the page object model. Basically, the theory of this is that every view in the UI of a web page is going to have its own page object class. And then there are going to be tests that will call those page object methods and then do assertions. So you can see here on the example on the left, there's a Gmail login page, which has a corresponding class. Then there's a Gmail home page, which has a corresponding class. So there'll be methods interacting with those pages. And then in the Gmail login test, you're going to start on the home page, get to Gmail, and then you're going to log into Gmail. So you'll need to interact with both of those test classes in your test case. Okay, so in your page class, you're going to define your elements with CSS or XPath selectors. CSS is the better one. You're going to write methods to interact with and query those elements. And then in your test class, you'll call those methods in a test class and you'll assert the expected behavior. So Selenium syntax, every testing framework has its own syntax and it's all going to be the same stuff, different syntax. So basically you're going to open a page. So you can see there like open/login. You're going to find the element .do an action, and then you can find an element and then check the condition. So for Selenium, you can see there on the left, you can just put a base URL in, and then you can do open/, and then that takes you to any pages that go off of this base URL. You can open a page directly. You can switch iframes. You can switch to and accept alerts. This is how you define your elements. So if it's a single selector, you would put the jQuery selector in the parentheses. If it's a list, so for example, if you have a table row, these are examples of how you can click lists, links, and buttons, interacting with forms. There's tons of this. This is all a snippet from the Selenium cheat sheet that I'll share with you guys later. But you can interact with cookies, you can switch browsers, you can refresh the browser. Pretty much anything you can think of that a manual user would do on a web page, there's a method for in the test framework. And I'm going to show you one now. So I will do a new share and we will do IntelliJ. This is IntelliJ. It's a really great IDE for Java. It's part of a larger suite called JetBrains. They have one for pretty much every programming language. Hopefully this isn't too tiny for anybody. I am currently in my page class. So this is main page. I've got my selectors defined here. So I'm using my Selenium elements. These are jQuery selectors. I've written here a method to search for an item. So I am going to make sure that the search button is there. I'm going to click it. I'm going to say the search field should show up. I'm going to send my search term in there. I'm going to query the search results pop-down text, and I'm going to return it. And then here, I'm going to click the See All Tools button. So these are all of the element definitions and the interacting with element methods. On my test, I'm going to write my test. This right here is a TestNG data provider. So this is basically my data set. So these are the two search terms I'm going to be searching for. This test here is where I'm using that data provider. So I'm just going to annotate it here. In my before method, I'm going to set the browser size. I'm going to add a listener to my test reporter so that I save my test results. And again, here I'm literally just calling my page object methods. So I'm calling my main page search for item, and here's my assertion. I'm asserting that the search term that I see is the search term that I expect. Okay, and then down here, after I go to the navigation to all tools, I'm asserting that I see this text. When I told you about TestNG creating groups, I've created two different groups. I've created a search group and a navigation group. So I can run all of my tests, or I can just run the tests that are tagged with these. And you can see that right here in this groups. It's a great way to do like smoke tests. And by default, Selenide runs everything in Chrome, but there is a browsers.json where you can add additional browsers and you can set your versions, and there's lots of other configurations that you can do. Okay, so right now I have in IntelliJ, I've got different test configurations. I'm just gonna run the whole file. I've added a lot of logging so that you can actually see what everything's doing. So normally I wouldn't have all this logging in, it would run a lot faster. I don't know if you guys will be able to see the browser that's popping up right now. Can you see it? Were you able to see the browser?
No, we just see the
All right, let me just give you this whole thing here. Okay, here we go. This will do it. Let me run that again. So this is going to run everything. So again, this is a lot slower in real life, but it opens the browser and you can see how fast this is. Like I'm a fast typer, but I can't type that fast. So all 3 of my tests passed. And again, this is normally run in continuous integration. But if you just, need to run a quick suite of tests, you can do it locally on your own machine. Okay. Let me go back to my presentation. Okay. So for CI, I thought about kind of going into it, but
we do not see your presentation right now.
Oh, hold on. There we go.
Perfect.
Sorry, in addition to a new keyboard, I switched to a mechanical keyboard. I also have my multiple monitors back now, so sorry for all the back and forth. So I thought about discussing continuous integration, but as those of you that have jobs in tech know, every company has such a different process and tech stack. There's a ton of it. So basically, whatever CI pipeline your company normally uses, automation can fit into that. And I guarantee there's probably some form of at least unit testing happening at your company. So you would work with your DevOps engineer to figure out what type of cadence you would want your automation run on and how you'd want that delivered. Okay, so here's some different ways that just including automation in your continuous integration can improve quality. You can run your regression on a schedule, release nightly, etc. Non-technical stakeholders can trigger jobs manually. To the right, you can see at the bottom, that's the chart that the test reporter that I use, that it generates that. This is something that a project manager could come into, see at a quick glance what's passing and failing. There's usually screenshots of failed tests. There'll be a lot of logging. You can run the subsets of tests using your test-ng groups. So smoke tests run very fast because it's usually a small subset of tests. You can even have those run on every commit and have commit hooks and basically block a developer from being able to merge their code if their code breaks the smoke tests. You can use different reporting libraries for easy to read charts, graphs, and logging. It's a lot easier to see on the right-hand side than just the console output that you guys saw when I ran mine. So what about if you need multiple browsers, screen sizes, browser versions, mobile devices, combinations of the above? There are solutions for that. So Sauce Labs, Browser Stack, and Perfecto are examples of third-party paid tools. These would be ones that you would basically use their API to add a configuration in your test code. You would pay a subscription, and then you could select which devices, browsers, OS versions you want your tests run against. Some of these companies use real devices, some of them use simulators. Most of the time it doesn't matter, but to some companies it does, so that can be questions that you ask them. But you can see this is an example from Sauce Labs. They've selected a mobile device. It's being run on the mobile device. You can click play, you can watch the test run, and then you can see all of the logging on the right-hand side. And you can also configure what information that you get. These, you don't have to write any special code for. It'll just take your existing tests and run them on different devices. If you want to go the free route, Selenium Grid is a way that you can set this up on your own. In order to mimic the different devices, you would need real devices. Some companies do that. You can have your Windows, you can have like your Internet Explorer run on like a Windows VM. You can have Safari running on a Mac Mini. It's possible to do. It's a little time consuming, which is why a lot of companies, if they have the budget, they go with one of these paid services. All right, so you're ready. You think this is great. You want to do it. First thing you need to do is define your scope. Do you want to automate everything? Do you need to automate everything? Maybe you just want to start with like the functionality that gives you the most problems, or navigation or something. You want to figure out what tools you want, which framework you want to use, what language you want to write it in. You want to figure out how to structure the framework and what features of the framework you need, and any additional libraries you may want to use for what you need. You then need someone to kind of architect the framework, figure out what the setup's going to be, configure your environment. So if you are going to run this in a QA environment and you also want to run it in a development environment, test data. Are you going to interact with a database? Are you going to have hard-coded test data? Are you going to pull data from AWS? Test script development, you actually have to write the tests, run your tests. Result analysis, does it give you the information that you want? Do you need to add more logging? Do you need more in-depth testing? And then basically support and maintenance. So once you pretty much have what you want automated, then all you have to do is maintain it. Every time new functionality comes out, you write a new test, add it to your repository. You may need to upgrade things. You may need to add additional libraries. Certain things may be deprecated. Maybe you have a massive functionality or UI change in your company and you need to go through and refactor a bunch of things. So those are all things to kind of keep in mind when you're getting started with automated testing. Things to think about when choosing a testing framework. This is super important because once you get a bunch of code in here, you're not going to want to rip it all out and change it. First and foremost, who is going to be writing and maintaining these tests? You may be a Python shop, but if the people that are going to be writing and maintaining your tests are a bunch of Java engineers, you may want to have your tests written in Java. If you're going to be hiring quality engineers, TestNG, Selenium, and Java is probably one of the most common test frameworks that quality engineers use. So that may be something you want to consider. If you have a bunch of people that are already writing tests in JavaScript, there might be a bunch of context switching if you change it. Your testing needs, is it web only? Do you need mobile web, native mobile? Do you need multiple browsers and tabs? Are you going to have pop-ups? Certain test frameworks don't support certain things. Selenium, you can do web only. You can also write Appium tests with it. WebDriver IO is a JavaScript framework that also supports writing mobile tests. Cypress is like the shiny new thing that everybody loves. It does not support multiple tabs and browsers or pop-ups. So keep in mind like what it is that you're going to need and does that test framework support it? Framework maturity, longevity. There are a lot of shiny new frameworks out there that everybody hears about and everybody thinks because it's new, it's great. But it may not have a lot of support and it may not have a lot of maturity. You may get into a framework and realize it doesn't support a bunch of things that you want, or you run into an issue and it's so new that there's just not a lot of Stack Overflow threads yet. There's not a community out there. Protractor was recently deprecated. That was a JavaScript framework that a lot of people liked. But again, it just didn't have a lot of longevity to it. Flexibility and customization. I'm going to pick on Cypress again. Cypress was written by developers for developers for testing, and it shows because they basically took everything that was quick and easy to use. They built it into the framework. So it's very easy for a developer with no testing experience to write tests. But if you're a quality engineer and there's certain things that you're accustomed to using and you want, Cypress does not allow for that. It's kind of like an iPhone. It comes out of the box and it is what it is. Size of the community and the ease of finding support and resources. Again, Selenium has been around forever. There's a huge community. Pretty much everything you'd ever want to do, you can do it in Selenium, and it's very easy to find how. Now, Selenium has its cons too. There's other frameworks that may be quicker to set up. Not everybody likes Java, which is probably the most common I think something like 60 or 70% of Selenium frameworks are written in Java. But if it's a brand new framework, again, there's not going to be a lot of resources yet. So if you're brand new to testing, this might be something you want to consider. For next steps, if you guys are interested, the tutorial that I basically followed to create the code for this demo is here. There's another great Selenide and TestNG tutorial, the Selenide wiki, Selenide documentation, and then that full cheat sheet that I kind of showed you a little snippet of. If any of you are actually looking for a job, I can say as a woman in tech who's had many jobs, the company I work for is fantastic, and we are worldwide, and we do have remote opportunities and contract opportunities. And we do have a very solid inclusion and diversity program that actually does things instead of just talks about things, including with hiring and recruiting and retaining. And then I want to open it up just for questions, just to, see what you guys think. If you have any questions for me, like I said, I absolutely love what I do, and I'm very passionate about it. So if anybody has any Q&A.
Thanks so much, Devon. Number one, I just really want to compliment your presenting skills. I'm the mobile dev in the audience, and so I could follow it really easily. So I just love that. Coming across platforms and joining some of our other events and still being able to follow the material that is not my expertise. We did have some questions, and I just want to shout out to everyone that if you have more questions, feel free to drop those in the chat or in the Q&A. And getting started with some of the questions that have already come through. What would you advise for someone who wants to transition to a QA position from more of a full stack web developer role? What sort of preparation would be helpful? Rose is currently looking to do this and appreciates any of your tips.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very, probably the easiest thing would be is to basically build an automation framework, stick it in your GitHub. I would say, depending on what language you write in now, so something recently happened with JavaScript where you used to be able to write synchronous UI tests in JavaScript using WebDriver IO, which means you didn't have to do callbacks, promises, async await, all that crazy stuff. That is going away with Node 16. So if you do a JavaScript-based UI framework, you're going to have to use promises, callback, async await, one of those syntax. I hate doing that. I honestly think that anytime you put Selenium in your LinkedIn or on your resume, your inbox is going to get blown up. So I would actually use this. I would do a Selenide TestNG framework. There's a really great, still sharing my screen here. Let me get out of this presentation so you guys can see. There's a really great web page that's specifically built for testers to practice automating. It's the internet. There you go. The internet. So you can see there's broken images, a challenging DOM, checkboxes, context menu. This is a fantastic page to build an automation framework about. You can literally just do a page class for each one of these, do a test class for each one of these, and then just start applying. If you're a full stack developer already, you should be able to build like a pretty fantastic automation framework. You may actually also want to look at Cypress. One of the things about Cypress is it allows you to actually interact with the development code in your testing code. But that is a shiny new framework right now. So if you have the bandwidth, I do one in Selenium just so you really understand automation, and then maybe for fun do one in Cypress and see what you think of it as a developer. Then I would just put that in your resume, maybe Google test-driven development, because you're probably going to be asked some interview questions about that, and that would be, I'd say, the best place to start. Just get it in your GitHub, stick it up on LinkedIn, and just watch the interest start rolling in. Yeah, let me get back to the tutorial links. I'll put that back up here.
Just what a really great answer. It's so actionable. I feel like every time I hear those kind of questions, you get kind of vague steps to go to go next, and I thought that was just such a good actionable answer. This is what you should do. So
yeah, one of the things I've done for my current company is I've actually created a curriculum for automation for new hires, and this is exactly what I'm giving them. So I would literally go through these tutorials, and you can do this for any testing framework. Selenium's just nice because if you understand Selenium, that's what so many other frameworks are based off of. Plus, you can do Selenium in any programming language, and there's so many resources for Selenium. You could do Selenium Python, Selenium C#, Selenium Java, but if you're doing Java, I would use Selenide. So the next one for accessibility testing. So accessibility is kind of its own. There are separate tools for accessibility, like screen readers to read your ARIA labels. I'm trying to think if there's an accessibility framework. The companies that I've worked for that have done accessibility testing have had like a separate team do that. I know screen readers are part of it, and then there's a few other things. But you could, like one of the things you could do is you could actually use like a web crawler to make sure that you have ARIA labels on everything. You could also make sure that, you know, hitting the tab button takes you from link to link. So you could do accessibility with testing with Selenium. It might be like using a chainsaw to weed your garden a little bit, but you could do it. Absolutely.
We had a couple of questions in the chat as well, in addition to the Q&A. So
Sure.
Samantha asked, what if I want to assign ownership of tests to a specific team and provide alerts for specific test failures? Are there any frameworks that allow for this?
Absolutely. So probably the easiest way to do this is usually specific teams have specific areas of the app that they own. So normally what we would do is either every team would have its own repository, or every team would contribute to a testing repository, but say this team owns login. So what you could do is you could do an integration with whatever your CI is, so that if there were test failures within these areas, within these groups, it would send an email to them. And you could also get like daily emails with the nightly runs. You could also integrate it with Slack, so that like I have it set up so that I only get a notification in Slack if my run fails. So then, and it's set up to go to me. And then if I'm out of office, it goes to my boss. And my team members have that set up as well, where like if this certain section fails, it triggers emails or Slack messages specifically to them. But normally the easiest way to do that is using groups. And then you can just say, okay, this team owns checkout, this team owns login, this team owns navigation. And you can just tag them specifically. Another thing I've seen done with TestNG groups, and other frameworks have ways of grouping too. TestNG and I think PyTest have the easiest from what I've seen, is you can actually create a group that's just the Scrum team name. And then you could literally say like, I don't know, the Broncos or whatever. You can just run the Broncos group. And if anything fails, you know it's theirs. And same thing when you're writing new tests too. Like you can say like, okay, I'm writing this new test. I'm writing it in the homepage page object. And there may be multiple teams that own functionality in the homepage, but I can create a group with my Scrum team name. And that way, when we run my Scrum team names group, it'll run all tests across all files that are tagged with that group. So yeah, there's lots of different ways you can do it, just kind of depending on, you know, whatever process your company and team agrees to. Oh, I see a question about frameworks supporting multiple tabs, browsers, and pop-ups. So Cypress does not, Puppeteer does not. And coincidentally, those are two of the shiny new things that everybody wants to use. And then they write all this code and then they realize they can't do what they want because they're like baby frameworks. Again, created by developers to make testing easier so they don't have to hire QA people. Selenium does it, PyTest does it. Let me get back to my slide about the different testing frameworks. So yeah, WebDriver IO does, Nightwatch does, JUnit for sure does. I'm not sure about Serenity. Capybara does, RSpec does. Most of these do. I know for a fact that Cypress does not, and Puppeteer does not. And Puppeteer is another JavaScript programming language. Generally speaking, the longer the framework has been around, the safer it is, because that usually means that somebody's maintaining it. And when, for example, WebDriver IO, there was a change in Chromium where node fibers were being deprecated. And node fibers are what synchronous mode in JavaScript relies on. WebDriver IO keeps on top of all this stuff. They realized it, and then they immediately came out with a message to all of their users, like saying, hey, we're looking at this. We realize it's coming up. We're going to fix it. I'll actually show you. Can you guys see my screen? Is my screen still on?
Yep.
Okay, good. All right, let me just show you. This is what a good framework will do. Where's the search? Here we go. Go to sync mode. And my company uses kind of a knockoff. Let's see, sync mode. My company uses a knockoff of WebDriver IO, and they were not prepared. So you can see this will be deprecated. They came out with a change mod for it. They opened up like a community bug thing for it. They explained what was happening. Like you can read all about like what they did to address it. So this is what you're looking for in a framework. A lot of the newer frameworks, they don't have all this in place yet. And some of the ones that have kind of been around, but they haven't been maintained. That's what happened with Protractor. They couldn't keep up with all the changes. It's a JavaScript framework, too much stuff was happening, so they deprecated it. And then they told everybody to come and use WebDriver IO instead. So, but yeah, for basically like iframes and browsers and tabs, like most of them should support that. Just stay away from Cypress and Puppeteer. Anything else?
We had one more pop up in the Q&A. I think you gave such a good answer the first time. What's a good starting point for someone new to QA from UX?
Okay. So one of the easiest things to do, like honestly, for like programming, the amount to do like a basic POC for a basic test framework, you're going to be using like fairly basic coding stuff. You may have to do some loops, but a lot of the syntax that you're going to be using is going to be the framework syntax, which as long as you've got Google in front of you, if you've got a good cheat sheet in front of you, it's not going to be terribly hard. You could probably immediately start with this, I would probably start with this tutorial. This just goes into a little bit more depth about what everything's doing and how to set up your Java environment. And you're going to be learning a lot about coding in general doing this. A lot of people are afraid of Java, but you don't really have to do a ton of Java-isms when you're doing testing. There's actually a really great book, Java for Testers. I love this book. It's cheap, but it literally just goes over the Java that you need for Selenium pretty much. But honestly, any programming language that you're doing, you can find a basic test framework for it. And I would just follow the tutorial. And you know, if you run into something and you're like, oh man, how would I do this? Just Google it. But pretty much the same thing, even if you're a newbie starting from scratch, the one thing you are going to need to know, and if you're UX, you may be okay with this, is CSS. Because you're going to need to find solid selectors. And so I would Google like Selenium CSS selector tutorial, and I would do a tutorial on that, because that's probably the thing that trips newbies up the most, is finding good selectors for their elements. So, you know, just being able to go in here and know how to construct a jQuery selector when you don't have a ton to go on. Basically, that would be the one thing I would like study up on more so than somebody that knows how to code. Anything else?
You give such thoughtful answers. I am so impressed. I struggle so much during the Q&A of my talks. If it's not planned, I don't want to say it, but I just such thoughtful answers. And thank you so much for presenting here today.
Yeah, of course. Sorry, I had so many screen fails with things going back and forth between different screens.
I said in the chat, the moment I share my screen, advancing slides just gets so much harder all of a sudden. So.
Oh, I know. So thank you guys for your patience with that. But honestly, it's super fun. It's basically like a ghost operating the browser that you get to control. And like I said, when you find a bug, it's not your problem. Like you basically write the code, you test other people's code. If you find an issue, you report it to the dev. And then they come back to you and you're like, yeah, this doesn't work in Safari, which almost always happens. And it's nice. Again, you get to code every day and it's a lot less stressful and it's just a lot of fun. So.
It doesn't look like we have any more questions. So again, thank you, Devon, for all of your resources and such a thoughtful and informative presentation. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today. Please go out and check womenwhocode.com/frontend for some more upcoming events. We're really excited about our end of the year holiday party between multiple tracks. And so we hope to see you at some of those as well. With that, we hope everyone has a great day, and this presentation will be available on our YouTube channel in the next week or so. Bye, everyone.